Hey everyone, I'm Amanda and this is Mommy's Reading Chair. So there have been quite a few videos surfacing lately from fellow booktubers about what really long books they'd like to read. And if you've watched any of my previous videos, specifically one that I'll have linked below, of my top 5 favorite books of all time, you'll know that I love big project books. I love fat books. All of my absolute favorite books, which I just learned about myself recently, are well over 600 pages each. I don't know, I wind up loving these really long projects. However, I will say I have to be in the right mood and the right place in my life to read a really long book. I haven't read a really long book in a while. And I think it's just because I've been, outrageously busy, and I like the quick reads when I'm in a busy, state in my life. So I haven't read a long one in a really long time. But I'm kind of itching to now after watching all of these videos. So I decided I would compile a list of the really long books that I am personally dying to read. Some of them I own on my shelf behind me, and some I will have access to through the Scribd app. So most of them are over 600 pages. To me, a long book is over 600. To some, it's over 500. I think 500 is not outrageously long. 600 is getting there, and anything past that is a project. It takes time, which I know we don't always have a lot of. But I eventually would like to get to these books. So, my list. The first book on my list is The Executioner's Song by Norman Mailer. I bought this book at a library sale many, many years ago, and I purchased it because it was huge and it weighed a ton. And I thought, this book's probably amazing because it's 1,000+ pages long. And I was in a place at that time where I was really into long books, and I purchased it. I actually did start this book. I started it sometime last year, and then life happened and I got crazy busy, and I wound up putting it down and going with some shorter books instead. I want to say I read a couple hundred pages of it. I didn't get super far in, but what I do remember, I did enjoy. So I do think I'll like this book. This story is actually based on a true story, which I think just makes it that much more interesting to me and attractive to me, is the fact that it's based on something that actually happened. I don't know if you want to call it true crime necessarily, but it follows a character who has just gotten out of jail. And in the course of this time that he's back, he genuinely tries to turn his life around, and, ABC happens, and then XYZ happens, and he finds himself in trouble over and over again. And he finds himself back in the American prison system, which of course is a mess, and he is given the death sentence. But it seems like the whole process of him being put to death is taking forever. And it gets to a point where he's so miserable that he actually does want to die. He does want to be killed through the death sentence. But it seems that this corrupt system keeps prolonging this time for him, and he's just absolutely miserable. So that's the gist of it from what I understand. The part that I got to was not very far in, and I don't even think he was in prison yet. I think he had just gotten out. So I didn't get very far in, but again, I did like what I had read to begin with, so I do eventually want to read this. I'm going to put the page counts on the screen. Depending on the version of the book that I have, it might be off a few pages, but I'm going to go by what Goodreads says. This book has 1,056 pages. Whew! And it's a little bit older. It was published in 1998, and I guess by a little bit, I mean, that's pretty old these days, right? So 1998, it's been around a while, and I'm really eager to get to it on my list. It's going to take me a while, I think. The next book on my list is called The Book of American Martyrs by Joyce Carol Oates. I also got this book at a library sale, and I picked it up because the cover looked kind of cool and it looked like it was promising. Also, it's by Joyce Carol Oates, which is usually an author that you can really depend upon to give you something good, especially when it comes to a controversial subject, which this one will not disappoint in controversy because it follows two families that seem to be completely different, but they are linked in that one of the characters, Luther, feels that he is following God's word by assassinating a doctor who provides abortions. And their link, of course, is that the family that is left after the death of the doctor is, of course, now grieving. And the man who actually assassinated the doctor really, truly feels like he did the right thing. And I mean, controversy up one way and down the other for sure. But I'm really eager to read this one. It's been on my shelf for less than a year, actually. I haven't had this one an outrageous amount of time, but it just sounds so heavy that I really feel like I need to be in the right frame of mind for a topic like this. But again, Joyce Carol Oates, you usually can't go wrong, so I'm going to give it a go. This might be one of the longer books that I read next because I'm so eager to read it. And according to Goodreads, this book has 752 pages, so not quite as massive as The Executioner's Song, but definitely up there. And this one's actually a little more recent. This one was published in 2017. I actually thought it was older than that, but 2017, that was not that long ago. So that one's a little bit more recent. Another book on my list is by an author who is a favorite of mine, Ken Follett. He wrote the Pillars of the Earth trilogy, which I devoured. I absolutely loved it, and those are well over 1,000 pages each as well. He is known for writing massive, massive historical fiction books, and I generally love his writing style. However, I started this book, and I think I'm going to say this for every book, I just wasn't in the right place in my life to read a huge epic project book. So it's been sitting on my shelf for a while now, and that is Fall of Giants. It is the first of a trilogy, I believe. Yes, the Century trilogy. And this one is quite a bit different than the Pillars of the Earth series. What I liked about the Pillars of the Earth series is because it was a time period that I don't read much about. Like, it took place in the Middle Ages, which I thought was super fascinating because you don't see a lot of books with that as, or at least more recent books written about the Middle Ages. And that was really fascinating to me. This one does not take place in the Middle Ages. This one is a completely different time period. So this one actually takes place during the First World War, which I've read probably several dozen World War II novels at this point. It seems like there are so many of them. I don't know if I've actually read any books that take place during World War I. If I have, I don't remember. So this one strikes me as interesting just because it's a time period I don't know as much about, especially in the fictional realm, the historical fictional genre. So I'm really excited about that. And something else that Ken Follett's really known for, and this is true for Pillars of the Earth too, is that he generally follows a lot of different stories or a lot of different families or characters, and this one is not an exception. This one does follow 5 different families, which is probably why the book is so huge. Like, the description of this book is super confusing because I don't know the characters yet, But from what I understand, it follows these 5 families, which, similar to the Book of American Martyrs, they seem to not be connected at all, but they do wind up being connected. And in this case, it's kind of, there's like this forbidden romance aspect. There's this like feuding family aspect. So this one, I want to say it's a priority for me and I'm super excited about it, but really it sounds very confusing to me. I just really want to get it off my shelf and read another book by this author. I remember starting it and having a really hard time following, but I do believe that that's just because I just wasn't in the right frame of mind for a book this epic. So when I'm in that zone and I'm ready for a project like this, I think I really am going to enjoy it. Fall of Giants is 985 pages, just shy of 1,000. I'm sure it'll feel like 1,000 plus, probably. Another book on my list is a book that was recommended to me by my mom, and it's actually it's not quite 600 pages, so this is in that 500 to 600 page count at 566 pages, and that is the story of Edgar Sawtelle. I purchased this again at a library sale, and I was with my mom at the time, and my mom said, hey, this book's really good. I don't have it anymore. You would really enjoy it. So I grabbed it for like a quarter. And it's been collecting dust on my shelf ever since. I think this book looks huge to me because I think I accidentally grabbed like a large print version, which I secretly like large print versions because then I don't have to wear my glasses. So that's kind of nice. So eventually I will get to that. But this book follows a character, Edgar Sawtelle, of course, who was born mute. So he can only speak in sign language, which one I think is already like fascinating. So according to Goodreads, Edgar Sawtelle has, like the perfect life, the perfect childhood with his parents on their farm. And then there's the return of some crazy uncle. And then with the sudden death of Edgar's father, the uncle like takes over the farm, I believe. And, Edgar, of course, is then not only grieving the loss of his father, but dealing with Claude, his uncle, taking over the farm, which apparently he's a terrible dude. So I don't know much about this book. Anytime a book is recommended to me by my mom, I wind up absolutely loving it. So this one can't be any different, right? If you know anything about Edgar Sawtelle, please let me know in the comments below. I'm just fascinated by this book that the main character is mute. So like characters that have some sort of disability or hindrance on communicating fascinate me because they have to communicate in such a different way. And writing that down in a story, I just think it's going to be good. It just sounds good to me. And that was one of the shorter long books, so maybe I'll get to that sooner rather than later, but we'll see. And another book on my list, this one also being one that my mom has recommended to me. In fact, I believe the book on my shelf is her copy of it, possibly, and that is Titans. This book seems to me like a historical fiction romance type, which I'm a sucker for those to begin with. And the fact that this is a long book just makes me really want to read it. And this book, according to Goodreads, does follow a character in the early 1900s who is the heiress of like this huge cattle ranch near Fort Worth. And then it also follows a like farm boy, like a poor farm boy. I'm assuming that they wind up crossing paths and falling in love, which, cliche as it may sound, you gotta love those. But I do like the time period. This cattle ranch is in Texas during like a big oil boom. So it's an interesting time period and it's an interesting setting, one that I don't read much about. So that one sparks my interest mainly because of the setting. I have not read anything by this author. My mom has and really has enjoyed everything she has read by this author. So I'm going to start with Titans, but I believe my mom has several others by her that I might snag up one day if she'll let me. This one is just over 600 at 608 pages. Okay, and I guess I'm just basically making a video of books my mom has recommended because this is another one on my shelf that my mom has allowed me to borrow that I haven't read yet. And it is older, published in 1987, my birth year actually, and that is Centennial. This one actually is like super popular, especially in the time it came out. I believe it was a bestseller, and it's one of my mom's all-time favorite books. It is chunky, and it is a project, but this is another book that is about a time period and a setting that I don't read much about, and that is like kind of the frontier, American frontier. Lots of stories of Native American peoples. So that to me is interesting. I like that all of these books have kind of a mix of different time periods and different types of people. But this one also does, I'm actually just going to read it because there's a whole lot going on in this one. But it says, brimming with the glory of America's past, the story of Colorado, the Centennial state, is manifested through its people. Lame Beaver, the Arapaho chieftain and warrior, and his Comanche and Pawnee enemies. Levi Zent fleeing with his child bride from the Amish country. Yikes. The cowboy Jim Lloyd, who falls in love with a wealthy and cultured Englishwoman, Charlotte Secombe. In Centennial, trappers, traders, homesteaders, gold seekers, ranchers, and hunters are brought together in the dramatic conflicts that shape the destiny of the legendary West and the entire country. This one I might actually count as one of my cards in my Disney Chooses My TBR games. I'll link those below if you haven't seen those. But I have, if I draw the Woody character from Toy Story, it asks for a Western, which I don't typically read. Don't think I have ever read a Western. I think I might count this. However, it's over 1,000 pages. It's 1,056 pages. So I haven't decided yet. I mean, a lot can happen in 1,000 pages. So we'll see. It is sitting at over a 4-star rating on Goodreads. It's a 4.24. That's really good. And I generally don't read these really old books. Like, I say really old, and I don't consider myself really old, and this book came out the year I was born. But I mean, in terms of books, like, you kind of want to keep up with the newer stuff. But these books that are continuously talked about, even since 1987, obviously they've got to be amazing. So I definitely will make time for this book eventually. Moving on to a more recent book, let's skip forward quite a ways, 30 years actually. I would love to read The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter. I love books by Karen Slaughter. I've read 2, I believe, and I absolutely loved them. So I know that I'm going to love this one. This one has been not necessarily intimidating, but I've been held up by this one just because it's so long. It is 656 pages, which again to me is not outrageously long, but you gotta be in the right frame of mind. I do also hear that there's this book's super intense, which doesn't surprise me because it's written by Karen Slaughter. So, I mean, I'm probably going to love this book. This one, I know if I draw a card for a really long book, this and Book of American Martyrs are probably my top 2 choices right now for a long book. But anyways, this one says, 2 girls are forced into the woods at gunpoint. One runs for her life, one is left behind. 28 years ago, Charlotte and Samantha Quinn's happy small-town family life was torn apart by a terrifying attack on their family home. It left their mother dead. It left their father, Pikeville's notorious defense attorney, devastated. And it left the family fractured beyond repair, consumed by secrets from the terrible night. 28 years later, Charlotte has followed into her father's footsteps to become a lawyer herself, the ideal good daughter. But when violence comes to Pikeville again and a shocking tragedy leaves the whole town traumatized, Charlotte is plunged into a nightmare. Not only is she the first witness on the scene, but it's a case that unleashes the terrible memories she spent so long trying to suppress, because the shocking truth about the crime that destroyed her family nearly 30 years ago won't stay buried forever. Whew! Y'all, that sounds so intense. I think I'm just in the mood for an intense book like this because I am like, oh, I really want to read this right now. It sounds so good. It sounds so good. I have watched some book review videos on this book without spoilers, of course. And a lot of people are saying trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning on this, this, and this. So if this is a book that is on your radar, please make sure that you look into that. I, for one, am very eager to read this one. I don't own it, but I do believe it is on Scribd eventually. Eventually. And last on my list for now is actually a book by Stephen King called 11/22/63. This book has been talked about so much lately. It is a recent release. It's been within the last year, I believe. Generally speaking, I'm actually not a huge Stephen King fan. I have read books by Stephen King and I have enjoyed them, but it's not like, oh my gosh, Stephen King has a new book. I have to run out. I have to get it. I have to read it. He's not that author for me, generally because I don't like horror. I know that that is not all he writes, and this book does not fit the horror genre, so it did pique my interest. So this book is kind of like an alternate reality or like an alternate ending to a historical event, and that is Kennedy's assassination. So I actually didn't know, I just read this again, I actually didn't quite remember how this book kind of starts, but it says that a high school English teacher in Maine was grading essays by his GED students, and he reads a piece by a janitor that was written by this janitor 50 years ago. And somehow the janitor like survived the slaughter of his entire family. Like, how crazy is that? I don't know. It just sounds incredible. And I know that that one will certainly blow my mind. Everybody I know who's read it has just been completely blown away by it. And just like the others, this book is well over the 600 mark for me. It is 849 pages. And I actually do not own this one, but I know it'll be really easy to find because this is a Stephen King book. So that's it for this video. I have several others on my list that I really want to get to that are well over 600 pages, but these ones are my priorities, which mean that I will likely get to them hopefully within the next year, maybe. It's so hard to commit to a long book, even though I wind up loving them. It's really hard to commit to those long books. Like when you pick up a book that's only 300 pages, you're like, oh, I can knock this out in a few days, or I can just read here and there and it'll still be done soon. But like if you want to get through a big project book like this, you really do have to commit to it. And I just don't know if I'm in the right frame of mind for them yet. If you're following the Disney Chooses My TBR games, you know that eventually I will likely pull the Belle card out of the bucket, of which there are 2 Belle cards, and you know that means I have to read a book that's over 600 pages. So at least I have some to choose from. I've already mentioned that I think I'm probably leaning towards a book of American Martyrs or The Good Daughter. Ooh. Or 11/22/63. It's so hard. I want to read all of these. But make sure you click subscribe and ring that bell so you can get notifications, and I will see you next time.